Today, Great.com talks with Karen Leslie, who is Executive Director at the Pet Fund. If you haven't heard of them, they are a non-profit organisation who are dedicated to funding veterinary care for those who can't afford it. If you are new here, please press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we learn the importance of supporting animals and their owners. Hello, Karen, and welcome to our podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for being here, and I really look forward to this conversation and to learn a bit more about what you guys do down there. So, for me and anybody new here, what is the Pet Fund and what do you do?
Right. The Pet Fund is a national organization. In the United States, we fund veterinary care for people who can't afford it. The rising cost of veterinary care is a continuing challenge to try to meet to help pet owners who can't afford veterinary care. Just as an example, in the United States, if we have an emergency, we can go to any human hospital and they are required to treat us whether or not we have insurance. That obviously isn't the case everywhere, but it's the case here. But that's not true for your companion animals. There is no, here we have a program, Medicare. There is no Medicare for animals. So the challenge is growing in terms of meeting the cost of medical care, which is rising globally for humans, but also for companion animals. And funding that is difficult. And the problem is that as a pet owner, if you do not have the funds immediately and upfront to be able to treat your companion animal, dog, cat, whatever animal you have, you are looking at two very horrible options, one of which is economic euthanasia, and the second is potential surrender to shelters. So we don't want either of those two outcomes for any pet owner. So it's our goal to try to raise funds for veterinary care for people who find themselves in a situation where they can't afford veterinary care. Most of our work goes to cancer treatment. That's kind of a separate topic in a way, in that the rates of cancer diagnoses are rising. And we have found in our over 20-year history that they have increased significantly. So it's now most of our work to fund cancer treatment. So that's our goal as an organization, to hopefully someday get to a point where there are sufficient resources that pet owners don't have to make that difficult decision. So that, in a nutshell, is what we work on.
Yeah, and I'm sure for, say, the pet owners, it is such a difficult decision, because I'm just trying to say, imagine a scenario in my head here, and I'm just thinking, like, imagine, let's say, a dog owner has to decide whether he or she decides to eat themselves that evening or feed their pet for the day or the week. So I'm sure it's a very difficult decision if they don't have the means or the funds available to, say, feed, treat, look after, or care for their pets as well. So yeah, it must be super sad as well, because obviously you have a pet, and the majority of pet owners have them for, say, a specific or a great deal of time as well. So maybe, say, potentially not having that pet around anymore could also have, say, detrimental effects on that individual too, which I want to talk about sort of slightly sooner. But what I want to ask you, Karen, is why would you say then what you do is so important?
Right. So not just, as you rightly point out, for the companion animal who faces premature euthanasia if care isn't available, but also for the pet owner. A large number of the companion animals whose care we fund are in fact service animals. Those are animals who are an extension to the community. They enable independence for their owners. They perform very vital functions. And so there is a huge impact, as you point out, to the pet owner if their care is not funded. So that is something that is often overlooked in terms of healthcare, in terms of the need for service animals, in terms of the need to support them. And that's something where this is not just something like a guide dog. This can be a dog who alerts to seizures if somebody is diabetic or just has seizures for other reasons. They don't necessarily also have to function as a traditional service animal in the way that, for example, somebody who has PTSD will have an animal who is a support animal, which is a separate category, but no less important. So again, the care of companion animals supports more than just the animal's care. They are an important part of their pet owner's life as, in our view, family members, that as human family members are. So to us, their care is no less important. That is also true to the pet owner, and that also has an impact on the community. Since those companion animals perform services that would otherwise have to be performed at great expense by other humans. So those are an important component of their owners or parents' lives. And that's something that we also try to create awareness about.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting what you mentioned there about the pets are actually service pets. Some of them, like they almost, like, I'm doing air quotes here, do a job for their owner, which would be to look out for them if they say, for instance, you mentioned about seizures, etc. So yeah, the cost of, say, employing, say, a human to go around to check on that individual and to look after them would be at a much greater cost rather than, say, potentially housing and feeding the pet too. So that's very interesting. Um, Karen, I'd like to ask you then, since its founding in 2003, what have been some of your greatest challenges and how have you overcome them?
Great. So the ongoing challenge is to convince people, exactly as you're speaking about the value of companion animals. One of the sort of objections that we have heard from people from the start is, if you can't afford a companion animal, don't have one. In our view, this is something that we work on to both educate people about responsible pet ownership, but also to make people aware that this is not just the routine care that we don't pay for routine care. There are things beyond routine care that are important. The companion animal's life itself is important. And while we try to bring awareness to the as you put it, jobs that many of them have in terms of being service animals, we also tried to bring awareness just about the inherent value of the companion animal and that they should be entitled to medical care as we are in our view. So that is part of the objection, to both raise awareness about the fact that they do have important jobs frequently, and the fact that they have their own inherent value. We also try to bring awareness to pet owners about that this is something that is inevitable in terms of the likelihood of cancer diagnosis, in terms of the likelihood of expensive treatment, also in terms of the ever-growing cost of medical care, and that it's something we all have to be prepared for. And people aren't necessarily aware of just how expensive that has become and is becoming. So that's something we try to bring awareness to as well. And of course, one of the other obstacles is just convincing people, for all of those reasons, that it is worthwhile and important and necessary to fund companion animal medical care. And the other issue that has become more important in terms of the increase in cancer rates is that people don't understand that in order to get approval for any treatment, whether it's for cancer or anything else, the animal studies are a requirement. And that is not just, beagles in a lab who are, kept in cages. Often the clinical trials are owned animals who live with their owners and whose families have the opportunity, whether through a biotech company or a university teaching hospital, to enroll them in clinical trials. Those are not free. Sometimes participation is free or discounted, but frequently they are not free. And unless you go through those clinical trials, you cannot engage in human clinical trials, with rare exception. So people don't understand that actually one of the connections in terms of expediting medical research, in particular cancer research, is to help fund those clinical trials, to help fund participation, because the universities can't necessarily afford to provide that free of cost. The pet owners, again, have the opportunity sometimes to participate in important research that you wouldn't ordinarily have access to. We have funded some of those treatments that are just on the horizon of cancer treatment. But to point out just how expensive some of that is, if your dog or cat is diagnosed with lymphoma, you could very easily be looking at a $10,000 bill. Wow. So when you talk about being prepared for veterinary care expenses, most people don't realize that is something you may be looking at, and either don't have the capacity to raise those kind of funds, or are not aware that they need to over time. So that's something that we work on too, in terms of raising awareness about the fact that this is not, as you point out, just a benefit to companion animals, but is important to humans, in that funding companion animal care in terms of participation in clinical trials, but also just the aggregate data of treating all of them, will help expedite human medical research, and in particular human cancer research as well.
Yeah, that's so, again, just so interesting. It's amazing really to hear that they sort of go hand in hand as well, and there's, say, benefits for both patients, as to say, I guess. Yeah, no, and also, like, I know it sounds horrible, but I'm sure, like, many people would say, here, let's say a $10,000 bill come through, and they say it's so easy to say, oh, you just put the dog or the animal or the cat down or whatever. Like, that's horrible to think that, because again, that individual has almost lived a life like with their pet. Like, that's some individuals, and I've actually known cases of individuals, say, lived with let's say a dog for like 20, 30 years, for like, let's say 20 years or 15 years with a dog. And it's like their best friend, literally their best friend. And I've heard stories about, say, potential, say, let's say a dog dying, and then the owners, say, sadly died shortly after, because it's almost like they've got nothing to get up for, or there's no one around to sort of for them to have like interact with, So yeah, I mean, it's just so sad, isn't it, sometimes? But I want to then ask you, if somebody, say, was to be presented with, say, a bill, or even before that, how would they go out, or how would they go about, say, reaching out to you guys to, say, offer that support?
Right. So our grants are very limited, and our grants, even at the most, don't cover that kind of bill. We wish we had that amount of funding, and at some point we hope to be able to do that. But what we do is educate them about the resources available, including our program. Typically what happens is that they will apply to us. If we make them a grant, they also have to make use of other resources that are available, only because the expenses have become so great that our grants can't fund that total bill if they end up with a $10,000 bill. This wasn't the case, again, when we started, back in 2002, 2003, our requests for treatment for cancer were under 20%. Now they are over 60% and growing. We're talking about the same percentage. So not only that, the age at which animals are being diagnosed is younger and younger and younger. So it's not unusual to have a 6-month-old dog or cat with cancer now. And that should ring alarm bells to everyone, because what affects them also affects us. So it's been our view, and it's our argument ongoing, that even if someone who does not understand the inherent value of the companion animal's life, or who hasn't recognized, exactly as you're pointing out, the value to their human partner or family, they can at least understand the benefit to themselves, as the saying goes, the life you save may be your own. because unless that research is funded, that's the canary in the coal mine, that animals are being diagnosed with cancer younger and younger, and that the rate of diagnosis is increasing sharply. And that should ring all alarm bells. So even if someone doesn't necessarily understand the importance of funding companion animal care, they should understand funding the research that will ultimately benefit them and which may be very necessary to save their own lives. So that's something that we like to remind people about. And in terms of finding help, what we do is provide grant assistance when we can, and also alert people to the other resources that are available, to both clinical trials and other resources for assistance, so that they can hopefully get the help they need to treat their companion animal.
Yeah, again, it's just what stands out for me there about the age of, say, the animals that are getting diagnosed with these types of cancers now. So do you have any, say, evidence or any reason why that would be, for these animals to, say, start getting cancer at an earlier ages, etc.?
Yeah, we have our data, which is alarming to us, which we've shared with, many in the press on an ongoing basis. What causes it? That's a Nobel Prize question at this point, because, it clearly has some, in our view, environmental triggers or cause. What that is, what those are, it may be something in terms of pesticide. It may be something in terms of, use of something in the environment that's affecting, that has the potential to affect humans as well. There are, rising cancer rates in humans that are specific kinds of cancer that may or may not be linked to diet, that may apply to companion animals as well. But nobody has that answer. And that's what's deeply frustrating. If we knew what that was, obviously that could be worked on or addressed specifically, but no one has that answer. What we do have are the data about how many animals are being affected and at earlier ages. And part of the expense too is that some things are available now that were not available 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if your animal needed an MRI, you had to be near a university, veterinary teaching hospital that had that equipment available. Now they're readily available, which is great. But that also starts at $2,000 before you've had any treatment done. That's just for the diagnostic test. So part of the reason that that healthcare costs have increased is because we have access to new and better care. But as with human healthcare, the costs have gone up sharply as well. What we were able to fund back in 2003 has doubled or tripled or more in terms of the cost for the same treatment now. So that challenge increases as time goes on.
Wow, I mean, and it just, again, it goes back to those individuals that can't even, or even are struggling to support themselves, let alone, say, if their
Right.
pet sadly was to get diagnosed with, let's say, a cancer that's going to cost thousands of dollars. Yeah, it's so sad to hear. So that almost leads me on to the next question as we sort of begin to wrap up. I'd like to ask you then, Karen, what are some of the biggest needs of the animals and the owners that you support, and how are you a part of the solution?
Great. So we would love to see any any reimbursement for veterinary care the way that in the US healthcare is reimbursed to hospitals. That's how, as humans, we're able to walk into a hospital and they're required to treat us whether or not we have insurance. There is no safety net for animals, at least not here, not anywhere else that we're aware of. So pet owners are on their own in terms of being able to afford this. So it's our continual challenge to find funding resources that enable their animals to be treated. And again, that's become increasingly challenging as the cost of medical care has outpaced everyone's ability to keep up. So one of the things that we try to do is look for multiple resources for support, so that those pet owners can have that care. provided, and that's our ongoing goal, not only to convince people of the need to support companion animal care, but the fact that it is only going to be through nonprofit assistance that care is provided. So we encourage people to remember that not only is it important to fund companion animal care through nonprofits like ours for companion animals themselves, but also for their own well-being, in that this care is going to lead very directly to their own medical research being enabled. So hopefully everyone can keep that in mind and remember that companion animal medical care is a very important thing to support.
So what is your vision for the future?
So we are currently working on building endowment funds so that we will be able to provide a consistent level into the future, since the cost of medical care is not going to go in the other direction. It's only going to get more expensive, both for humans and for animals. So continuing to build awareness about the, again, rising rate of cancer diagnoses, and also the importance of supporting both research and treatment as far as that goes. And to remember that this assistance only comes from nonprofits, and that to benefit everyone, not just companion animals, but the community at large. This is something that we all need to focus on and that we all need to support.
No, I mean it's super important. Like we mentioned many things today, and obviously the health and well-being of the animals, but also of their owners too. I think they, like I said, they both go hand in hand. So
Right.
for anybody that's say listening or watching this episode today, and they want to say reach out, what can somebody do to help, and what action steps can they take to be a part of the solution?
Sure. We would strongly recommend reading over some of the information on our website, which is www.thepetfund.com. They can certainly contact us with any questions. We strongly recommend that they, as pet owners, prepare for a future where they are statistically likely to have to deal with cancer diagnosis and treatment at some point, and to prepare for that as much as possible. We encourage people to reach out to us with their veterinary care needs. And of course, we recommend that people read over our website and the work that we're doing to fund veterinary care, and of course, send support if they're able to do that.
Karen, thank you so much. And
Thank
for you,
you.
thank you. And for you listening, if you've enjoyed this episode, please press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that will show the algorithm that this is an important conversation, so more people can learn the benefits of supporting animals in need of veterinary care.